Story 1. I've been working in information technology for around 25 to 26 years now. I've been with different companies, but you see quite a bit of corporate nonsense in this field. Back in 2005 or 26, I worked for a telephone company, a huge one that had a Jira-like bug reporting tool for one of its most complicated and convoluted software systems. The software was so complex and outdated that even the in-house development team was afraid to make changes to it. Some updates in the past had backfired spectacularly more than once, so even the smallest update required weeks of analysis before implementation. In that development team, 3 of my friends from college were working. I was on another team that had an easier workload. One of my friends on that team was Badu. To paint an accurate picture of Badu, imagine the kind of person who is always playing innocent pranks. You never know if he's being serious when he talks because he enjoys saying the most shocking things just for laughs. He knows a bit of magic and uses it to prank people. He also loves soccer. He was good at his job, but he was also quite tired of it. He procrastinated a lot and generally didn't put much effort into his work. Being part of that development team didn't help, as it wasn't a fast-paced environment, and people got bored due to the lack of action. Since he was often bored, he played pranks. One of his favorites was connecting a second wireless mouse to a colleague's computer to randomly move the cursor, making them think their mouse was malfunctioning. They would call tech support, but Badu would stop moving the cursor when the technician arrived, leaving them confused. The prank target ended up calling tech support 4 times before someone finally told them what was going on. The team also had a little tradition. Once a week, they would book a windowless meeting room for an hour so that 3 of them could take a nap while the 4th one kept watch. The role of the lookout rotated weekly. Most of the update requests Badu received followed a similar pattern. This report indicates that this value is 25 when it should be 27. Please fix it. Each request typically came from a different department, but each department sent in a couple of requests, probably once a month. However, Badu knew that the algorithm responsible for these calculations was extremely complex. The reports were generated monthly in batch processes that could take hours, and testing them was painfully tedious. So, instead of going through the entire process, he simply updated the final value in the report. Where it once said 25, he changed it to 27. Problem solved. He received about 10 to 15 of these requests daily. To keep things professional, Badu would update the bug tracking tool, writing a simple comment in the field, end value verified and corrected, and then move on to the next task. Then, a new manager took over the development team. He had transferred from another department within the company and was well known for being, well, not the most insightful leader. He immediately clashed with the team. He believed that quantity equaled quality and was obsessed with tracking numbers. Coming from a database management background, he constantly ran queries to gather information. He also assumed that every resolved ticket meant the underlying issue had been permanently fixed. He didn't understand the complexity of the system and simply thought the team was exceptionally skilled at identifying and resolving problems quickly. In reality, he was just a glorified administrator. One day, he gathered the team and announced that he had run a query and discovered that the comments being entered into the bug tracking tool were too short, typically under 50 characters. He declared that this was unacceptable and insisted that comments needed to be at least 1,000 characters long to properly document what had been done to resolve each issue. The entire team tried to explain that the existing comments were more than sufficient. However, the manager stood firm, warning that failure to meet the new requirement would negatively impact his assessment of their work. Being the mischievous person he was, Badu decided to comply, but in his own way. He knew the manager would never actually open the bug tracking tool itself, as he preferred working with database queries. The first ticket came in. This value is incorrect. It should be updated. Badu corrected the value as usual, wrote his standard end value verified and corrected comment, and then, taking advantage of the tool's formatting capabilities, copied and pasted an entire sports article about the latest soccer match into the comment field. He changed the font color to white and set the font size to the smallest possible setting so that it blended into the background, making it practically invisible. Then, he closed the ticket. If you were the original person who submitted the request, you wouldn't be able to edit or see the comment unless you manually highlighted the text. For the next ticket, he did the same thing but inserted a long-winded rant about something completely unrelated. On another ticket, he simply held down random keys and the space bar until he reached the 1,000 character requirement. He soon got bored of these basic tricks and started getting more creative. With each new ticket, he added something unique. Eventually, buried deep within the bug tracking tool's comments section, an entire original novel written by Badoo took shape, split into small chapters that no one knew about except for a few of us who had lunch with him and the team. A month later, the manager approached Badoo and said, "I've noticed that the size of your comments has increased significantly over the past month. You're averaging well over 1,000 characters per ticket. Keep up the great work." Badoo, along with my other friends and I, left the company for better opportunities about a year later. To this day, I still talk to Badoo and the rest of that team regularly. Story 2. A large part of my father's family moved into my grandmother's home in 2020 to sort out their job-related issues. At the time, it was me, a 14-year-old boy, my uncle, a 32-year-old man, my father, a 42-year-old man, my grandmother, a 75-year-old woman, and occasionally my aunt, a 38-year-old woman since she had a stable job. We also had a house cleaner, a 51-year-old woman, and a few dogs. When I first moved in, I quickly learned about the struggles adults go through when dealing with work and finding solutions to their problems. This understanding deepened my bond with my father, whose main goal was to move us out and into a home of his own. My father had to deal with family issues, often being singled out by his own relatives. I was his only source of support, as he had gone through a divorce with my mother. He also endured years of my grandmother belittling him while praising my uncle and aunt for their achievements. I knew this hurt him deeply, but it only pushed him to work harder. Looking back, I realize I did some petty things as a child that only added to his stress. I have since learned from those mistakes and vowed never to repeat them. As the years passed, I matured, but I found myself facing a new challenge: my manipulative grandmother. There was one particular day when my grandmother blurted out in front of everyone that my uncle was useless. It devastated him so much that he lost control and broke a lot of the furniture in the house out of frustration. My father and aunt had to calm him down as he wept in pain. Witnessing my uncle in such distress for the first time left me deeply shaken. Time went on, and I started to gain a better understanding of my environment. By the time I turned 17, I felt motivated to contribute to the household, especially since I felt guilty watching the house cleaner manage everything on her own, while the rest of the family was busy with work-related matters. Growing up, my grandmother constantly yelled at me, so I made it my mission to minimize the reasons she had to complain. I clenched my fist and began taking on more responsibilities: cleaning, doing chores, and addressing my so-called laziness. To maintain peace, I even created an agreement between us that we could both reference. This significantly reduced her complaints and eased the tension in the household, but many problems still lingered. Another challenge I faced was my inability to communicate with the house cleaner. We did not speak the same language, and she often used this to her advantage by making up false stories about me to my grandmother. I could never defend myself because I did not understand what she was saying. When I asked my grandmother what she had told her, she would simply tell me to learn the language, even though she was the only one who could have taught me. The language in question is Setswana. Unfortunately, it is difficult to find online lessons for it, as it is not commonly taught. Before moving in 2020, I had grown up in a city where only English was spoken, so my parents never placed much importance on teaching me our native language. That is how I ended up in this situation. Fast forward to 2024 to 2025. I am now 19 years old, and I continue to deal with accusations from my grandmother, accusations that are impossible to refute. She claims that I do not wash the dishes or feed our dogs, even though I do both regularly. The most frustrating part is that my uncle, father, and aunt immediately believe her without a second thought. If I try to defend myself, they interpret it as me being disrespectful. I decided to take some time to collect my thoughts and then calmly speak to each of them about my situation. At first, I had no one on my side, but after a few days, they slowly started to understand my point of view. Despite this, I have been labeled the naive child and the scapegoat for other people's mistakes. My grandmother and the house cleaner continue to create false stories that fuel this narrative, making it easier for my family to turn against me. That was when I came up with a plan, one that could not be disputed. I started documenting everything. I wrote down the specific date and time whenever I completed a chore, using my phone to record proof. Whenever a false accusation was made, I had solid evidence to counter it. One day, in a moment of frustration, I pointed at my grandmother, while expressing my feelings about all the pain she had caused me. It was not an offensive gesture, just a simple pointing motion. However, she immediately twisted the situation, claiming I had disrespected her. The house cleaner, of course, backed her up, completely disregarding the actual point I was making. To ease the tension, I later apologized for pointing at her. But then she brought up a new accusation, claiming that there had been a time when I muttered something disrespectful under my breath when she asked me to do something. I knew for a fact that I had never done such a thing, especially at my age when I was solely focused on maintaining peace. Yet, she insisted it had happened, with the house cleaner once again supporting her claim. When I asked for specifics, when did I say it? What exactly did I say? She refused to provide any details. At this point, I started seriously considering recording every conversation in the household. It seemed like the only way to refute their lies and expose the truth. Another thing worth mentioning is something that happened back in 2017. My grandmother once took in an older cousin of mine, a 21-year-old woman who was studying to become a doctor. There was a major argument between them, though I am unaware of all the details that led my cousin to move out. What struck me as odd was that she never contacted the family again after that. This whole situation is unbelievable. It feels like madness. The thought of focusing on my studies and working hard to finally move out has never been clearer. I appreciate the contributions my family has made to my life, but this is absolute chaos. Story 3. Another shared story about someone asking for the cops to be called reminded me of this. Several years ago, we had some new neighbors move in, a man and a woman, renting, and they weren't exactly salt of the earth folks. There were obvious signs of drug and alcohol abuse, playing music so loud that our windows rattled in our house next door, mean dogs that escaped all the time, people over all the time, and parking in the road. You know the type. We tried to be polite but steered clear of them when possible. It was a bad situation made worse only by the fact that the college kids that used to live there had moved out after years of neighborly bliss. Their parents actually still owned the house, and I had already made a couple of calls to them about the disturbances. I guess it must have been about a year after they moved in when I was driving home from work and headed down our street in a direction where I was passing in front of their house. It was almost dark out, and this was a small residential street with light traffic, and the speed limit was maybe 25 or 30. The man of the house was out in the street stumbling around, yelling, flailing his hands, blocking cars as they were trying to get by. Obviously, he was wasted. He kept screaming for somebody to call the cops. I managed to eke by him and park in my driveway. I watched for about 15 minutes as he continued this little show. I wanted to watch for any evidence that he was in any sort of jeopardy other than being in the street. So I looked at my wife and said, "You know what? He wants the cops, I'm going to oblige." And I picked up the phone and dialed 911 and told them there was a man in the street blocking traffic and asking for someone to call the police. About 5 minutes later, the city's finest rolled up in 2 squad cars. We went out and sat on our front porch and watched them try and get this dude into the back seat for 20 minutes, and ultimately he was hogtied and thrown in on his stomach by the time they were done. I guess he didn't want the cops after all. We never saw him again, but a couple weeks later, there was a new man of the house that had moved in. We sold and moved a few months after that, but never saw that first guy again, so I have no idea what happened. I can only presume he had outstanding warrants and was locked up. Story 4. For some background, I've always been pretty calm and peaceful. I grew up in a household where we rescued animals, dogs, cats, even the occasional bird with a broken wing. When I moved out on my own 2 years ago, I promised myself I wouldn't get a pet right away since apartments can be limiting. But fate had other plans. It started when my neighbor mentioned hearing tiny meows coming from their shed. We discovered a litter of kittens, but by the next day, the mother cat had moved all of them, except one, the smallest one who could barely open his eyes. The runt of the litter. I couldn't just leave him there, so I took him in, bottle-fed him every few hours, and taught him everything a mama cat would. I named him Jack. Jack grew into this sweet but particular cat. He loves attention and being petted, but he absolutely refuses to be held by anyone except me. To him, I'm his mother, the only one he trusts completely. So there I was one afternoon, sitting on my front steps with Jack in my lap, enjoying the warm weather. He was about 8 months old at this point, playful, but still small for his age. A little girl walking with her mother stopped in front of my house. She was adorable, probably around 6 years old, with pigtails and a bright pink dress. The little girl politely asked if she could pet my kitty. I told her she could, but warned her to be gentle and not try to pick him up. The little girl was absolutely perfect with Jack. She crouched down and gave him little scratches under his chin, which he loved. Jack purred loudly, and the girl giggled. The girl thanked me sweetly and skipped back to her mother with the biggest smile on her face. That's when everything went sideways. The little girl excitedly asked her mother if she could have a kitten of her own. Her mother quickly agreed, which surprised me. The mother walked closer to me with this weird smile that made me uncomfortable. She asked about Jack's gender, and when I told her he was male, she declared they would just take him home today. She told her daughter they would stop at the store on the way home to get cat food and toys. I was confused by what was happening and explained that they couldn't have my cat. The woman's face transformed instantly. Her friendly expression disappeared, replaced by pure rage. She accused me of saying her daughter could have the cat, and then changing my mind, using explicit language that shocked me. I immediately stood up, holding Jack protectively against my chest. I'm only 5'2" inches, and this woman was at least 5'8" inches and built solidly. She towered over me, getting closer. I clarified that I had only said her daughter could pet Jack, not have him. The woman unleashed a string of insults and vulgar language, calling me names and questioning who I thought I was. Her tirade continued with curses that made me extremely uncomfortable. Even her daughter looked shocked and scared. A couple of teenage kids from down the street stopped their bikes nearby, watching the situation unfold. I decided the best move was to just go inside. I apologized for any confusion, but firmly stated that Jack was my cat, and expressed hope that they would find a kitten for her daughter soon. I turned to walk up my porch steps. That's when I felt a sharp tug from behind. The woman had lunged forward and grabbed Jack, trying to pull him out of my arms. Jack started screaming, not meowing, but full-on cat screaming and clawing at anything he could reach. I could feel his little heart racing against my hand. In that moment, something primal took over. This wasn't just about someone trying to steal my pet. This was someone hurting a baby I had raised. Without thinking, I spun around and punched the woman square in the face. When she didn't let go of Jack, I punched her again. Blood spurted from her nose, and she stumbled backward, finally releasing her grip on Jack. He immediately climbed up to my shoulder, his safe spot. The woman screamed that I had broken her nose and called for police, demanding someone call them immediately. Her daughter was crying now, and the teenage neighbors had their phones out, thankfully recording everything. The woman falsely claimed I had stolen her daughter's kitten and assaulted her. One of the teenage neighbors spoke up, contradicting her story and saying they saw everything that happened. The police arrived within minutes. The woman was still screaming, now directing her anger at everyone present. She maintained her false story that Jack belonged to her daughter, that I had promised to give him to them, and then attacked her when she tried to take him. Fortunately, the teenage neighbors showed the officers their videos and explained what really happened. When one officer approached the woman to get her statement, she actually tried to hit him. That's when they handcuffed her and put her in the patrol car. I was shaking so badly that one of the officers asked if I needed medical attention. All I could think about was Jack. I told the officer I needed to get my cat to the vet because I was worried the woman had hurt him when she grabbed him. The officers took my statement and information, then let me go to the emergency vet. Thankfully, Jack was fine, just scared and a bit bruised. Later, I found out I had broken the woman's nose and knocked out one of her front teeth. I still have a small scar on my knuckle from where her tooth cut me. She was charged with attempted theft, assault, and assaulting an officer. I feel terrible for her daughter. She was sweet and gentle with Jack, and she didn't deserve any of this. I hope she eventually gets a kitten of her own with someone more stable to help her care for it. As for Jack, he's even more attached to me now, if that's possible. He follows me everywhere in the house and sleeps curled up next to my head every night. I guess we both learned that sometimes you have to fight for the ones you love, even if they have 4 paws and whiskers. Story 5. This is my first post here, so I'm hoping this story belongs here. Hi guys, I'm 24, female, and I work at an escape room. I've been there off and on for about 6 years now, and this is important because last year, after opening back up from shutdowns, the company I work for, who I love dearly, called me and asked me to be my location manager. They told me they trust me and they know I'm the best qualified for the position because in the years I worked there, I already proved to do a lot for them and for the building. Okay, so if you've never done one, or maybe never even looked into it, escape rooms are pretty much what they sound like. We have different themed rooms with a goal to either get out or achieve something inside so you win. In order to do so, there are puzzles and some clue lines in the room to follow. It's a great experience, and I highly recommend it to anyone looking for something to pass the time. Alright, some important info about my company particularly. Our tickets go for about $29 per person. That includes taxes and fees, which is a pretty competitive price in the industry. And on our website, when you book, there is a notification that pops up to state. We do not do refunds. There are of course special exemptions to this because we are human after all and things happen. Arrive at the building 15 minutes before your game start time so we can check you in. You can use the restroom, orientation, and all that jazz. This entitled person was part of a group that went into our easy to mid difficulty room. I didn't run this game personally, but since I'm the manager, I check in on my employees' games throughout the hour they play. First of all, they broke notification number 2 right away. Their game time was set for 2 p.m. and the group didn't show until nearly 2:20. We always call our groups to make sure they're still coming because, hey, like I said, things happen and traffic or life could get in the way. So I called right at 2 because they were supposed to be there at 1:45. There was no answer to the phone call and I left a voicemail. Hi, this is Lil Bean calling from the escape room. We noticed your appointment with us and we just want to make sure you're still coming. You can call me back at this number, thank you. No one called back. Sometimes they call the main office and I'll get a text or call from that location to let me know a game will be late, but not even that happened. So around 2:20 my door chime goes off and my employee greets the customers as usual, and we don't mind still putting them in the room as we didn't have any conflicting games for that theme anyway. The majority of what happens here in the middle is my employee coming to tell me what's going on and me only interjecting where I have to. Hey, they don't want to sign the waiver because they don't know what it's for. The employee tells me. This is a typical question, but I've never had anyone refuse to sign our waiver. So I went out to our orientation room to explain. Hi guys, welcome to X Company. I heard you have some questions about our waiver. Yeah, why do I need to sign something to play a game? That's a little ridiculous. Oh, all of our customers have to. It simply states that we lay out some rules for the room so that nothing breaks and you don't get hurt by those actions, and if you break a clearly stated rule and it results in an injury, then we are not at fault for that injury. Plus, the waiver is also for you. You guys pick a team name and we send your group a picture after your game. I do all of this like I would speak to any customer. Happy, smiling, best customer service voice. It's basically a personal relations job anyway, because most of it is interacting with these groups in a fun way. Most of the group just nod and begin doing their waiver at this point, but this entitled man scoffs and mumbles something about a PhD and how he's not stupid enough to break things in an escape room, but he seems to do the waiver anyway. Mind you, these are people who look to span the ages of 18 to 30, in a group of about 7. I leave again and hear my employee give the orientation and play the video for their room, then put them in their game. All seems well for the next 40 minutes or so, and I check in on them every once in a while to see how my employee is doing with sending clues and nudging them in the right direction. They don't seem to understand this puzzle, and the whole time during the orientation he kept saying they were going to win because he has a PhD or something. The employee tells me, "Well, it's like I tell everyone. In games like this, it doesn't really matter how smart you are. It's communication and ideas and puzzle solving that get you through these. We have cameras and microphones in the game rooms, so we can monitor things easily, and sure enough the entitled man is spouting about his PhD and how our game is dumb." But their puzzle solutions were all wrong, and I knew at 45 minutes in they probably wouldn't get out. But it seemed like the rest of the group was having fun, which is the most important thing to me. So I walk away again because I trust this employee to do his job right, as he's a great employee and I've never had a complaint about him. Cue the end of their game, and my employee goes in to explain the game to them. Standard procedure. I'm not around at the time, but my employee later told me the entitled man just kept getting more annoyed looking the more things were explained. And I hear them take their picture when what I assume is the entitled man starts yelling. My employee said something back which I can only assume was him saying he'd get the manager. And I hear running to the control room. I'm sitting and doing some printing. The man wants a manager. He's asking for a refund. The employee says, "And did you tell him we don't have the power to give him one?" This is true because only the company owner, my boss, has the power to issue refunds. Yet, but he wants to talk to you, so I step out of my control room, and the man is standing right there at the door as his group shuffles out, some of them still laughing about things that happened in the room. I said I wanted the manager. "I am the building manager, sir. What can I help you with?" "I want a refund." We didn't get out. It took everything I had not to laugh. That's definitely not how refunds for any entertainment goes. Imagine going to the movies, watching the whole movie, and then demanding a refund because you didn't like the ending. Same principle here. "I'm sorry, sir, we don't give refunds." That's clearly stated in the pop-up you have to check off when you book. Then I may have been a little petty on this, but I added, in fact also in that pop-up, it states that you agree to be here 15 minutes early for your game, and you were nearly 20 minutes late. Had I had another of that game book, I wouldn't have been able to let you play the whole hour anyways. We just start their clock at the allotted game time in those cases. What? No, it doesn't. That's nonsense. Seriously, where is your manager? Now I'm a small girl, and I do look young for my age. Some of my employees are older than me, but that doesn't change the fact that I'm the manager here, and I have the most experience. So I did what any petty manager would do. I said sure, and walked into my office and walked back out. "Hi. I'm still the manager, sir, and according to our company policy, we do not issue refunds." Now even more red in the face than any human could be, the man said, "I have a PhD and your game was rigged. I want a refund." At this point another group walked in to play a game, and he was frightening half of them because they were little girls with their moms, it seemed. I do tend to have a bit of a temper, so I think I snapped. "Your PhD doesn't mean you'll understand the game. You aren't getting a refund for wasting 20 minutes of my employee's time, playing an entire game and verbally assaulting me and my employee. Now get out of my building, or I will call the police and have you escorted out. You're also banned from stepping a foot here again, game or not." I think he was shocked. For a small woman, I can get pretty loud. And to be honest, I wasn't even sure I was allowed to ban him completely, but whatever I needed to get him out of my face and my building. He physically stomped down the hallway to the exit like a child throwing a tantrum. I immediately called my boss and told him everything that happened, and all he said was, "You were right. If he shows up again, call the police." Story 6. I used to work for a company in the UK, based in London, but with regular travel all around the country. We had very long hours and were required to be on site when work began at 7:30 am, but you could be hundreds of miles away. You were allowed to stay away, but you had to get approval from a senior manager, usually only agreed through gritted teeth because of the difficult expenses policy and the wrath of the senior manager who approved the expenses. More on this guy soon. I used to get up early, commute all around the country, often doing 2-3 hours in the car at a time. Most often stopping to fuel the car or just have a break, usually grabbing some breakfast and a coffee, because I was often leaving the house before it was palatable to eat breakfast. I was young and conscientious, so I would buy my own breakfast, but buy a coffee separately and keep the receipt for expenses. Usually £1.05 breakfast and £1.03 coffee. Our expenses policy allowed me to put the whole lot on expenses, but I was conscientious. Anyway, after months of this, I submit my expense claim. My immediate manager approves it without batting an eyelid, as he can see the addresses on the receipts and the timestamps. So once a manager has approved it, the expenses would go to one senior manager to approve, for maybe 200-300 claims a week. Major trust issues and seriously backwards. One morning, early at head office, the senior manager comes into my office and tells me to follow him. I follow him to his office where he explains to me that the company isn't here to buy me coffee. Long story short, I'm told to stop playing fast and loose with the expense policy. I wasn't, and follow the rules. Here is the malicious compliance. Speaking to HR, they had a policy about work-related driving and EU Working Time Directive, which meant that all the early starts and late finishes had to stop immediately because it was breaching policy and the law. So the next time I had to be on site for 7:30 and was 2-3 hours away. I stayed in a hotel the night before. 3-course meals and breakfast, all in line with the expense policy and working time policies. This continued for about a month, because you can only submit expenses for payment in the last week before payday. My expenses went from £100 a month to £1,000 a month. Expenses submitted, manager approved, sent to senior manager. I got a phone call to come to HQ the next day for a talk with the senior manager and HR. The following day I attended and got an absolute roasting. What did I say? Who do you think you are? When I could get a word in, I explained how I was traveling in line with company policy, health and safety legislation, whilst also complying with the expense policy to the letter. HR confirmed. Nothing he could. Needless to say, the policy was changed some months later. I felt much better because I was well rested, fed and working the hours I was being paid for.